Bear down, Chicago Bears. We're going to talk today about the 10 Chicago Bears with the most to prove in 2024. And listen, there's some very good players that are going to be on this list because they still have something to prove. Do they have something to prove to everybody? No, not everybody is on board with that. Some people are going to put their blinders on and say, hey, this is the best we can get. This is the guy. But in their minds, I think these are the guys who are going to have the most to prove when we get into this this new season here. It would seem to me that the Chicago Bears do have a few positions in which there's a lot of money at risk, a lot of money on the table, and these guys have to prove that they are worth it and worthy. And by the way, most of the people financially on this list, when you look at them, I hope that it makes sense to you because, again, some of these are going to be high-performing, high-octane players that need to earn their money. And if they do that, the Chicago Bears are going to be a fantastic team this year. And, some of them you can't do very much about and might even be in a countdown for maybe they don't even make the roster or they don't even make it to this season. There's always a possibility. So if you like this type of content, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe button, the bell to be notified of future content. No matter what, make sure that you hit that like button. It helps me out, trend in the algorithm. So number 10, we're going to talk about the big one here that I think a lot of people are still wondering why he's even on the roster, and that's going to be Jaylen Jones Jr., still on the Chicago Bears roster, still thought highly of by Ryan Poles, and still in the mix somehow. And I don't really know, other than the fact that he's a good special teams player, on why he would even be in the mix at this point. However, if you consider some of his statistics, he did average 27 yards a return. However, one of the reasons that Jaylen Jones Jr. was a kick returner was because he didn't have a lot of value in other positions. But as an emergency player, he could come on and he could fill some gaps. However, in that same context, with an underperforming, horrible receiving unit in the year 2023, the Chicago Bears still did not find a way to get him the ball. In the course of the season, he had 7 targets and only 4 receptions for 20 receiving yards. And then when you take into context his rushing, he had 8 carries on sweeps for 51 rushing yards, but he didn't have a rushing touchdown. He didn't look very good. This was not this guy was not nailing it, if you will. Again, 27 yards for kick returns, no punt returns, by the way, because they didn't have confidence in him because there are problems. He's got hands problems. You can see here, the image here is him missing a ball that would have won a game, mathematically anyway, that would have won a game last season and costing his team. And that's been kind of the narrative for Jaylen Jones Jr., despite the fact that the Chicago Bears brought him in with some pretty high hopes. And the guy's making $1.5 million a year with only $500 counting towards the salary cap. So, he could be an expense that he might end up being released to save $1 million on the payroll. And why would that be? Well, the NFL is changing. They are changing their strategy on how kickoffs are done, so you don't have to, quote unquote, waste a roster spot on somebody who doesn't have a benefit in the entire context of the offensive scheme. In fact, you could have someone like Rome Odunze or DJ Moore. Now you could, because you're not getting this. The one problem that you have with kickoffs is the high impact of somebody running down the field and hitting somebody super hard and just knocking their block off, if you will. Those are the kind of guys that you're putting at risk. Well, with the new kickoff system that's being implemented this year, the teams are going to start 10 yards apart, and they're going to be right where the guy is catching the ball to do the kick return, which means that kick returners are going to have a good advantage, I think, in this context. I think there's going to be it's going to be a little bit different. And with that being the case, you you really have to ask yourself, does Velus Jones even have a place on this roster anymore? That's and I think that that's a very valid question at this point. Again, 7 targets, only 4 receptions for 20 yards in the course of 17 games. His catch ratio, I mean, that's, 4 of 7 is what, 57%? You can't be in the NFL with a 57% catch ratio. So Velus Jones Jr. probably on the clock, probably looking at a lot of negativity, and with a much better quarterback, potentially. I don't want to disrespect Justin Fields, but we all saw the product on the field. We know that he was part of the problem. With a quarterback who makes quicker decisions and a snappier throw, is it possible that Velus Jones gets more touches? Not in this offense. I don't think that there's a place for him. So we'll be watching to see whether or not he makes it. But, at this point, he's got a lot to prove to this team. Next up, Nate Davis. Now, famously, Nate Davis just does not like to practice, but he does show up in games. He's not a guy who lacks performance in game. In fact, he only gave up 1 sack in the entirety of last year, which was tied for 62nd in the league. But 6 penalties, he was tied for 10th. And offensive snaps played, 663, he was tied for 54th in the league. So, a little bit injured, a little bit out, a little bit, not fantastic, but only 1 sack allowed, 6 penalties. So, you can take that. That's something that you can take, but it's not elite. This guy was brought in as an elite level athlete with elite level performance, making elite level $11.3 million per year with a dead cap hit right now of $12.7 million. So Nate Davis has a lot to prove to this team right now, and he's making it very difficult by not showing up at mandatory minicamp for anything more than a walkthrough, saying that he was again injured. Now, if he shows up to the game ready to play, hey, sometimes some people are just game players. There are plenty of people throughout history that didn't like to practice, that came out and they performed at a high level in the games. Allen Iverson hated to practice, came out and was a superstar in basketball for a long, extended period of time. There are plenty of guys that are out there that do that. Nate Davis, however, has to be better than he was last season. And if he does show up, and he does, then that's going to be a great thing to see. But he's got a lot to prove. Again, when you break it down, he gave up a sack and he had 6 penalties. You got to improve on your performance. If he gives up 1 sack over the course of a season, I think I'm good with that. I think that's very few sacks, especially coming from the guard position. I would be pleased with that sort of performance. But the penalties, let's get that penalty down to 4, maybe 3 total over the course of the season. And, Nate Davis can redeem himself very well. But I think that he's got a lot to prove. Last year there was a tragedy in his family. His mother passed away, and I'm sure that affected him. He did go, he dealt with things. And that's difficult on anybody to lose a family member. So, we wish him nothing but support and the best, but you got to perform at a higher level for the Chicago Bears, especially this season. So I think that Nate Davis, you got a lot to prove this year. Next up on the list, Jaylen Johnson. Now, you might be asking yourself, why, Bleeves, would you put Jaylen Johnson on here with something to prove? Well, Jaylen Johnson just got himself a big-time contract. But here's the good part for Jaylen Johnson. Only $13 million counts towards the salary cap this year. He's getting a very nice contract deal, okay? And he got his 2024 total cash that he's getting, $47.8 million, 4-year, $76 million contract, which means that he's averaging $19 million per year overall in the terms of the contract. That is not the elite level, despite the fact that he was arguably the best cornerback in the league last year for long stretches and long periods of time. What he decided to do was take a shorter term contract at 4 years so that he can come out and he can get the big deal in 4 years, which would probably mean that he's leaving the Chicago Bears at that point. I don't know that fits in to the grand scheme of things, depending on on cornerback and availability, et cetera, et cetera. But 4 years from now, you're going to be paying Caleb Williams a lot of money and Roma Dunze a lot of money. You'll be losing those. So a very complicated sort of scenario here, but I think he's got a lot to prove. First of all, that he's worth every bit of the contract that he earned to continue playing at that high level. Now, statistically speaking, he had 32 solo tackles, good for 93rd in the league. He was targeted 50 times, good for 85th in the league, and he allowed 25 receptions, which was 100th in the league. However, he had interception rate of 4, which was tied for 5th in the league. So, there are some numbers here that just don't add up to the super elite level yet that you want to see out of him. He had 1 forced fumble. He had 1 assisted tackle. So, we got some turnovers, which he had not had very many turnovers until last season. And as far as solo tackles go, I mean, you only tackle what gets close to you to begin with. And when you're playing on the edge, you're not going to get a ton of tackles. However, 93rd, not a great ranking. Receptions allowed, 25, not a great ranking. It was tied for 100. You want this guy to be a shutdown guy, and at this point, he has not been shut down. One of your arguments could be that the defensive line is part of that problem. And we'll get to some defensive line players in this analysis, but he does have to put up a little bit more. We need to see a little bit more of an elite level from Jaylen Johnson. So I think that he's got a lot to prove. If not to me, to himself this year, to prove that he's going to be worth this gigantic contract that he's working towards over the next 4 years. The next guy, number 7, is going to be Braxton Jones Jr. And you guys know I am a fan of Braxton Jones Jr. I do think that he is a solid player. I think he's coming along. He's not been horrible, but I want to say more than not horrible. He played 724 snaps last season, good for 51st. Remember, he was injured to start off this season. And we did start off with Larry Borom, who, despite the fact that I do not like Larry Borom, did redeem himself okay overall. Not great, but okay. And Braxton Jones gave up 2 sacks, which was good for 67th in the league, and he had 9 penalties. That's a lot of penalties in a short period of time. So Braxton Jones is a problem. Now, he's going to have to earn this position. We are going into a season with high expectations, with a need for protection for Caleb Williams' blind side. That is Braxton Jones right now. He's going to have to step up big. Now, in the event that he continues to improve and we see a continuation and improvement of the stats and he stays healthy and gets more offensive snaps played, then all of this changes. Now, you have 9 penalties when you have 1,200 snaps. Okay. 724, that is a problem. And has he been healthy for an entire season yet? I mean, there are questions that we have that are still going to have to be answered by Braxton Jones. But again, if he makes the progress that we hope that he's going to make, then this is going to be fine. However, we would certainly like him to not give up a few sacks again this season. So I'm going to move on from him, just saying that, listen, he's going to have to do some work. He's going to have to do He's going to have to do better because Kiran Magaji is sitting in the wings right now. He is a massive monster of an offensive tackle. And when he's ready to step up and step in, Braxton Jones has become a placeholder for this position. It is upon Braxton Jones at this point to lock it down. And Matt Pryor, I don't think is a threat for the starting role, but if pressed and in need for a starter, then Matt Pryor does become that guy. So we do have a lot of pressure, and I think that Braxton Jones is going to have a lot to prove going into the 2024 season. The next guy up on the list is my man. You guys know I've been a fan, and I've been a fan because I think that he is one of the best run stoppers in the league. Now, of course, he hasn't been great at the passing game. However, He also hasn't been great at tackles either. So over the course of the season, and we do have to remember Yannick Ngakoue got most of the snaps. So these stats, despite him not being a full-time, he subbed his way in and out. And by the way, at 6'4", 280 pounds, he meets the requirements of what Matt Eberflus is looking for in his edge rusher. Okay. But he had 19 solo tackles, which was good for 63rd in the league last year. He had 8 assisted tackles, good for 55th in the league. And he had 4 sacks, which were tied for 77th in the league. Now, we need more sacks out of that edge position. If you consider 4.5 sacks for Yannick Ngakoue, and then you consider 4 sacks for Demarcus Walker, 8.5 is not a bad number for him to have. This is not, if Demarcus Walker could put up 8.5 to 10 sacks in a season for the Chicago Bears, we've got our guy. I mean, it should be it's very simple at this point. If he does that, we've got our guy. Now, he is 30 years old, and he'll be turning 30 on September 30th of this year. So he's already probably at or near the downside of his career. But I want to say this, he feels inspired going into this season. It feels like he is ready for the big time. It feels like he is motivated. And in fact, Eric Washington has even come out and said, I really like what I'm seeing from Demarcus Walker right now. He has put in some work. So if that's the case and Demarcus Walker is ready for it, then this is going to be a really, really good surprise for a team that's been in need of that edge rusher, which Demarcus Walker was last season, but he wasn't elite. And if he takes a step up in any way, then that's going to be just an absolutely great thing. Now, he had no forced fumbles. So, we do have to talk about, there are pieces to his game that we're going to have to hope for, that are going to hopefully improve over this season. But we know that we have an elite run stopper. We know that we should still be a very good team against the run, if nothing else. And if he develops that the wheels to get around the corner, then we've got something here. We've got a team that can collapse the pocket, and then that's going to lead us into another guy who's going to have to step up big time. That's got a lot to prove, and I think he's going to prove it. Now, Demarcus Walker, $8.66 million is what we're paying him for the year. So I would say that as the 8th highest paid player on the Chicago Bears, he's got something to prove, especially at 30 years old. Now, if he doesn't perform, Austin Booker is waiting in the wings, and we went out and we got him. And if you listen to anybody who's talking about it, Austin Booker is a prospect that, in fact, most people are saying if he had just gotten another a year of seasoning in college, he'd probably be a 1st or 2nd round pick coming out next year. So the Bears may have gotten the steal of the draft in Austin Booker, but for right now, he's going to have to put in some work to supplant Demarcus Walker. And if Demarcus Walker agrees with me and has the most to prove on this team in 2024, then I think we're going to see Demarcus Walker start to really shine. But again, he's on that downside. He's post 30 years old, so we should see some wear and tear on the tires, if you will, something that we're looking at from Keenan Allen as well. So let's move on to the next guy. And number 5 is going to be Caleb Williams. Now, does Caleb Williams really have a lot to prove? Yes. However, it's because he's the number 1 overall pick. When we look at the statistics that we saw from him in college, he was an elite player playing at an elite level and doing an incredible job of leading his teams to victory. However, there are some problems with his game that exist, and he's the type of guy that takes the time to work on them. So he's the number 1 overall draft pick. He can't come into the league and be mediocre. Now, could you, if you are the number 1 pick, come in and throw 28 interceptions like Peyton Manning did? Sure. Could you come in and just be, kind of okay? Yes. But Caleb Williams has made it known, number 1, he feels like he was the best player in college. He's made that known. He's also shown a level of humility that says to people that he really wants to prove himself and he really wants to be better than he currently is, and he wants to work hard to prove that he is among the elite quarterbacks or will be among the elite quarterbacks in the NFL. That in itself, I think, means that Caleb Williams is going to have a lot to prove. Now, if we go back a few years back, you remember Andrew Luck came into the league and he turned Indianapolis immediately into a contender, going on to a decent team that, we didn't know if they were decent or not, but when he got there and he started to drive it, they were immediately a good team. Also, Houston Texans, not great. And CJ Stroud comes in and they become, but he's not a number one pick. However, they did become a much better team. So Caleb Williams is going to have to prove that he is worth that number one pick. And if he outshines Justin Fields going into this, you guys have to remember, because I keep reminding you every possible time, at 7-10, the Chicago Bears did not look the part of a real playoff contender. But when you start to dig down deep and you start to look, 5 games were within 7 points. If you win 4 of those games, you're an 11-6 team and you're in the playoffs, and Green Bay's not in the playoffs. The Chicago Bears were so much closer than fans realize at getting into the playoffs. And what was missing? Elite quarterback play. If we have elite quarterback play, if we have elite receivers, if we have our defense just continue doing what it did in the second half of this season, then this team is, and I keep saying it, a 13-4 team that's going to shock and surprise a lot of people. The question right now is the learning curve that Caleb Williams is going to have to go through. And if he does come out on this on the positive side, Caleb Williams will probably be, look, we're all going to have Caleb jerseys at some point pretty soon. I get the feeling. And again, you guys know, or you should know, I was all in for Justin Fields. I thought that Justin Fields should be the quarterback. And, I love what I see from Caleb Williams. Every time I see stuff, I see him make plays. I see him make throws. Does he look incredible? No. But it's casual gaming right now. He's learning the system. He's adapting to what he needs to know so that he gets ready and he gets it drilled into him so that he's ready to just hit the ground running. And he's doing everything he can to make sure that's the case. And he's a very quick study, which has been fortunate for the team, according to what they say and according to what all of his coaches say. He's a very quick study. He recognizes what he does wrong. He tries to fix it immediately. So he's doing a lot of the things that you were hoping Justin Fields would do that we didn't see. And I hope that means a lot. And I hope he comes in, hits the ground running. Again, if there's a little bit of improvement in the offensive line, there's a vast improvement in the backfield that we currently have in the wide receiver team right now. And I say vast, that feels disrespectful to Kahlil Herbert, who I still like, and Roschon Johnson, who I love as a running back in bringing in DeAndre Swift. But look, we have upgraded. So if this does not work immediately, then a lot of people are going to be looking at Caleb Williams. So I think he's got a lot to prove going into 2024. Next up on this list is the big dog, Gorden Dexter Sr. Gorden Dexter Sr. Tied for 102nd in the league in solo tackles, 124th with 3 assisted tackles, but he had 4 sacks, which was tied for 37th. Now, if you consider that he played limited snaps in the 2023 season, and he didn't really get an opportunity to account for himself because Justin Jones did a fine job, then you have to consider this. What happens when he improves? Well, he had 4 sacks. Montez Sweat, 4.5 sacks. Demarcus Walker, 4 sacks. Yannick Ngakoue, 4.5 sacks. So this team, if they take a leap forward for Gorden Dexter, then we have settled our defensive line. And the only thing that we need from that point is depth. Now, if you guys remember, other than Zach Pickens, the only person that we brought in was Byron Cowart. So we do not have a lot of depth at this line. So I think that Gorden Dexter, his job right now, his sole goal at this point is to prove that he belongs. The guy's 22 and a half years old, almost 23 years old, 6'6", 312 pounds. But he's fast, he's strong, and he's the 3 technique, hopefully, that we've been looking for. If he is, then the left side of that line with Montez Sweat and Gorden Dexter is going to be a nightmare for offensive lines. And I do want to say that here's the best part about this. If he does, and again, I do think he's got the most to prove, but if he does show that he's got the most to prove and he wants to prove it and he's in that right headspace, then guess what? This team will continue to improve. Montez Sweat will get better at the system, which means that he'll be freer to play his game. Gorden Dexter, the same thing. If he's showing up the way that we think he's showing up right now, the left side of this defensive line is going to be a nightmare for the offensive line. And this is going to be great when we get towards the end of the season, because all of our games in our division are going to be backloaded, which means that this team is going to have a chance to work itself into a frenzy and get itself together to be that team that's ready to take down the big dogs. Detroit Lions winning the division, and then of course the Green Bay Packers going in for the wild card. We want to take all of that down, and it will be good to see these guys come together and really start to get themselves on the same page. So I think that Gorden Dexter wants to prove that he belongs. Lost a lot of weight over the weekend, built a lot of muscle, lost a lot of fat over the just a few short months, by the way. Gained a good amount of muscle in just a few short months. This guy apparently has changed his diet regimen, his exercise regimen, and he is ready for prime time, according to him. So if he is, then this is going to be one of the guys that's going to make a gigantic difference on this team. Next up, Keenan Allen. Now, does Keenan Allen really have anything to prove to anybody in the NFL? The answer is no. But I think he has something to prove to himself, which is why I put him so high on this list. Last year, he had 145 targets, good for 10th in the league, with 108 receptions, good for 5th in the league. So this guy is a ball hawk. He is all over it. He gets open. He makes the job of the quarterback that much easier. Receiving yards, 1,243 receiving yards, good for 11th in the league, and he had 7 touchdowns, which were tied for 17th. That alone tells me he has nothing to prove to anybody but himself. But I think that the situation is this. I think Keenan Allen leaving and knowing that the Los Angeles Chargers did not want to give him what he wanted in order to continue playing for that team has put a chip on his shoulder in order to prove the Los Angeles Chargers absolutely 100% wrong. I think that he's going to be playing with a purpose this season that we have not seen yet from Keenan Allen, despite the fact that we always see Keenan Allen playing at an elite level. This guy's had 8 straight 1,000-yard receiving seasons. He is, this is Hall of Fame caliber receiver. And what we're looking for is a guy who, again, in my opinion, going to have a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. And 6'2", 211 pounds. This guy is a big time gamer. He's going to get open and he's going to make Caleb Williams look like a star, provided that Shane Waldron is using him right in this offense. Not to forget, by the way, he is a jet sweep guy, which means that Velus Jones Jr. will not be your jet sweep guy going into this season. Keenan Allen will be that guy. He had a couple of carries, not a lot of yards, but he was that guy for the Los Angeles Chargers. So Keenan Allen, I think, with a lot to prove going into 2024. Again, not to me, not to you, but to himself, that he's still that elite guy and that the Los Angeles Chargers, they fucked up. Next up is Tremaine Edmunds. Now, look, again, this is one of those things where for linebackers, he was the number 1 linebacker for interceptions, which is why here's a picture of him and Jaylen Johnson after an interception. Also, in solo tackles, he had 81 solo tackles. He wasn't the weak side linebacker; he's the Mike linebacker. So, and look, TJ Edwards at the will position, 155 tackles over the season. This guy was the guy going for the ball the entire time. TJ Edwards, fantastic season. Tremaine Edmunds, by comparison, despite that, again, this is one of those guys with a massive $22.4 million contract and a huge amount going towards the salary cap, couple years left on his contract. Tremaine Edmunds has something to prove at this point. 81 tackles, was good for 28th in the league. Assists, 30, good for 31st in the league. But there could be more. This guy's being paid as an elite linebacker in this league. And interceptions are not the only thing. When you look at the amount of forced fumbles, no forced fumbles, doesn't have necessarily a nose for the ball, if you will, when it comes to making those tackles and stripping people, which has been a Chicago staple for a long period of time. So I think that the guy has a lot to prove this year, that he's worth 22.4 million. Otherwise, the Bears are going to rapidly move on for him from him, because TJ Edwards, even in the will position, could be a middle linebacker option. We are not out of options. And Jack Sanborn came along, looked really fantastic last season. So the Bears have a strong linebacker core, in my opinion. And Tremaine Edmonds is still the leader of that. But I think that he's going to have to step up big time right now. He's going to have to be that vocal mouthpiece that runs this team. Now, remember, the one thing that Lance Briggs said in his analysis of the Chicago Bears in watching the defense last season, they don't talk to each other. They don't communicate with each other. And that is Tremaine Edmonds. Tremaine Edmonds is the leader in the middle of this line. It's his job to call out assignments, to let people know where they need to be, what they need to be doing. He's the one that has to communicate effectively to people, and he was not doing that. Well, guess what? In minicamp, he was doing that. He had taken what looks like the leap forward. So for me to put him in the number 2 position, saying that he has something to prove, again, it's because I think he has something to prove to himself and to everybody, that he is that elite guy that we are paying $22.4 million per season. So I think that Tremaine Edmonds is about to have another big year, and we're going to find out he was absolutely worth it. But he's going to have to prove it on the field, and I think that he's definitely motivated to do that. And the number 1 guy, again, this is another situation in which Montez Sweat doesn't have to prove anything to anybody. 8.5 sacks last season, which or did he have 8? He had 8 sacks here, and he had 8.5 there. So he had 16 total sacks. That's a vast difference between Yannick Ngakoue and Demarcus Walker. So he was a monster. Okay. Total tackles, 29, tied for 36th. Assists, 12, tied for 27th. 16 sacks, tied for 6th. And then 3 forced fumbles, tied for 6 as well. Now, he's also making $25 million. He is still young and in his prime, a couple years removed from 30. He's not on that downside. And he is, in my opinion, the guy that really wants to prove to everybody that he's among the elite in this league. There are a lot of people out there looking to put a bookend next to Montez Sweat. There are a lot of people out there that want to see a huge edge rusher on the end of this Bears line. But if we have Andrew Billings still taking up a ton of space, Gorden Dexter showing a lot of aggressiveness at the defensive tackle at three technique position, and proving himself to be better than what we had before, then Montez Sweat, I think, is the one that wants to be the leader of this team. He's the guy that wants to, and I think that what we need to see, or what we would like to see from Montez Sweat, is a continuation of this level of production. If he comes into this season and has 20 sacks, imagine the legends that we're going to write about Montez Sweat. This guy is on the Chicago Bears now. This is the monsters of the Midway. This is one of the OG teams. This is one of the winningest teams in the history of the NFL. And Montez Sweat is the guy on this team that makes all of it possible. So I think that Montez Sweat probably has the most to prove to everybody this season. Now, honorable mention, I'm going to point out there are a couple of people on here that didn't make the list. Kahlil Herbert, I love Kahlil Herbert, but and he does have I think he does have something to prove this season, because he was kind of pushed backwards by DeAndre Swift, but I don't think he's going to get the opportunity to do that. Also, Charles Presley says Zach Pickens needs to step it up, and that is true. Zach Pickens is going to have to be, he's going to have to step it up. But again, this is a guy with limited playing time. And, we don't have a lot of money in him. So if he continues to improve, we have time for him to continue to improve. So I don't think so. You know what I mean? 12 and a half sacks. Okay. Well, Pro Football Focus says that in 2023 he had 16 sacks. I don't know why. That seemed to be off to me, which is why I said the number doesn't seem right. But I mean, it's Pro Football Focus, so I have no idea why. Matter of fact, Montez. Let's see why something wasn't right. 6 and 6.5, 12 and a half. Maybe the end of 22. I don't know. It felt like 12 and a half to me. Actually, it felt like 8.5 to be honest. At the beginning of it, and then I saw somebody had 20 sacks or 21 sacks last year, and I thought probably more. So 12 and a half, which was good for 36th in the league. I'm sorry, for 6th in the league. So I mean, he's still got a lot to prove. He's still got a huge amount of this is the highest paid player on the Chicago Bears, with a huge salary cap hit, a huge amount of dead cap space, and a couple years of getting better. I think this guy has a point to prove. He wants to be among the elite in the league. I think he's got the drive and the passion and the desire. So I think that Montez Sweat is going to be that guy. But again, Kahlil Herbert is a lot to prove. I don't think he's going to get a chance to prove. Zach Pickens, he's going to get a lot more chances to prove something. I wonder why this is wrong. Pro Football Focus not known for that, right? Kind of weird. So I think there's a lot to prove. I think all these guys are going to have a lot to prove. Torrey Taylor's probably going to have to prove that he is the booming leg. Roma Dunze wants to prove that he's better than Puka Nacua, of course. And he wants to break all the rookie records. There's a lot of people with a lot of chips on their shoulder. And that, by the way, for you as a fan, is a fantastic team. I am super bullish on the Chicago Bears going into this season. I hope you are too. And that is my time. Thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate each and every one of you. If you haven't already, make sure you hit the like button on your way out. And remember to bear down and fuck Green Bay. We'll talk to you again very, very soon.